Hi, I'm going to hold it here for a while because last time I guess I took it down too soon. I wanted this to be my screenshot for episode 3. As you can tell, this is the podcast Full Crazy Town, episode 3, where I'll be reading from my book by the same name, Full Crazy Town. So, before I get started, I wanted to do a little bit of a welcome to Full Crazy Town. This is it. I'm in the man cave out back of my place in Eugene, Oregon. This is episode 3. My name is Stephen Cole. I'm the author of Full Crazy Town, not just another dystopian alarm bell. Full Crazy Town includes a solution to surviving the rise and fall of the American empire. If you've become estranged from family and or friends, Full Crazy Town can be used like a guidebook for rational discussions and strategies for fighting back against government overreach. Full Crazy Town contains many talking points refined over the years based on the insights of people like Jimmy Dore, Glenn Greenwald, Nick Cruz, the Do Dissidents dudes, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, Kit Cabello, and others. So instead of sinking into depression over the hopelessness of this all, rebel! Buck up there, bucko! Don't give up. Maybe we can't stop the decline into chaos, but we can unite to mitigate the damage and maybe put off Armageddon for a few years. Who knows? Today we start toward the beginning of chapter 2, where I left off last week. And I mentioned then that I wanted to start this week with Glenn Greenwald, which is what I'm going to do. Here he exposes the ruse of changing the narrative in order to fool the masses, also known as the masses, fool us into distrusting each other with culture wars rather than class issues. See? So follow the money. As we approach 1 year of genocide, 2 2/3 years of the proxy war in Ukraine, there's a lot to be despondent about, but hang in there. We might not succeed, but at least we know that we won't give up. We won't surrender, Dorothy. Never surrender, Dorothy, or anybody else. So here we are on page 22 of FCT. Glenn Greenwald, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who helped Edward Snowden expose federal privacy violations, did a dip into psychological research and came up with a clever ruse used by politicians and activists. It involves changing the narrative about personal values as they relate to public life. Okay, now hold that thought. Used to be we were judged by our actions more than our words. If you talked the talk, you needed to walk the walk. However, now, if you use the right hashtags on social media, shout the proper slogans when everyone is watching, and make sure everyone votes for your favorite candidate, you can do as you please and act however you wish. I'm not sure why some people value talk over actions, but for some, if you just follow the rules of woke rhetoric, that is, pretend to be concerned about a vulnerable population, then you can easily get some attention and act however you want. The collective has triumphed over the individual as far as accountability goes. This applies to politicians who claim to be fighting for the climate as they travel in mega yachts and private jets, and to any activist who condemns others for their bigotry, racism, sexism, criticism, and or ridicule while carrying on with their own brand of bigotry, racism, sexism, criticism, and or ridicule. It's a great trick if you can get away with it, but I prefer to try and not be a hypocrite. For example, I always try to tell the truth because I don't want to have to try to remember the lie, because then I'd have to remember that I lied about every time I was around the person I lied to. It's easier to do it this way. I just know I'm taking responsibility for my own actions as best I can. Knowing that I'm not perfect, I focus on the biggest issues: healthcare, inequality, crumbling infrastructures, not push button cultural topics related to race and gender. Although I know that race relations, women's rights, and LGBTQ issues are very, very important. Those with the most influence or power and the most money are using identity politics to pit us against each other and then laugh all the way to their banks. As the government crushes us, they want us to focus on special interest groups. They want us to fight back against the oppression of vulnerable populations, but not economic oppression that's waged against the 99%. I'm always talking back at people who say the government officials must be stupid if they expect us to believe all that they tell us. They're not stupid. Not that clever, but they're not stupid. They're doing a bang up job of increasing their power and control over us. They might make stupid sounding excuses for their moves, but their efforts are achieving most of their goals. They can get us to focus on how stupid they must be, then they have once again changed the narrative. A more accurate term for them is sociopath, or better yet, greedy psychopaths. I'll bet they don't know that they're making excuses for bad behaviors. I'll bet they've convinced themselves that the only way to convince others of their own correctness is to believe it yourself so that you'll sound more convincing. Besides, they're desperate. They know their time is at the top is threatened and they're unsure about what to do. So they trot out weirder and stranger resolutions and bills and lawsuits. There's a case pending that will equate all campus protesters as Hamas affiliates. Zionist paramilitary units intimidate, block, and attack nonviolent demonstrators. It's easy to see why so many people refuse to take on the man. Trying to put the brakes on a runaway train is hard, but moaning and groaning, name calling, bickering over semantics, and put down humor is easy and can be fun for some, I guess. Social media provide the perfect venues to start catty fights. Everyone is easily offended and immediately sees criticism or questioning as a threat to be repulsed. Too bad it's so easy peasy to get people to focus on fear and hate instead of togetherness and love. Remember love, laughter. For instance, I saw a protest about the banning of whatever. And mixed into the signs about women's rights was a sign that read, "Ban old white men." What? About a drug? Well, I thought we were talking about drugs. It's easy for me, an old white man, to narrow my eyes at those who cast me as the problem. I mean, I'll accept my share for society's ills, but no more than that. Our government pretends to advocate for women's and children's rights and special interests around the globe. They especially pretend to care about gay rights in Iran and Guatemala. The media report that Hamas hates gays. They push emotional issues like same sex marriages in Catholic countries. Locally, they advocate for meds, surgeries for minors who want to change their genders, with or without parental consent. They demand that trans women be allowed to compete against biological women and to dress and undress with them. The culture wars are fought everywhere. Here in Eugene, Oregon, the Oregon Country Fair's board of directors is dysfunctional due to a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee's insistence that she has the right to use a variation of the N word in the presence of a person of color who has repeatedly asked her not to do so. Believe women. not men. The same thing happened at the 4J School District's board, where a black board member felt discriminated against and business ground to a halt as the bickering continued. Same with the protests and counter protests at a local pub, Old Nick's Pub, where a drag queen was going to read stories to kids. Protesters showed up with signs that read, "Stop sexualizing our children," and trans rights activists screamed at obscenities at them and accused them of spreading hatred. I consider myself an anti war and equal rights activist. I'm not going to let myself get dragged into the bottomless pit known as ESG/DEI debates. The ruling class is crafty. They just sit around dreaming and scheming about how they can hold on to and possibly increase their power. They try crazy and or dangerous stuff. And if they don't get their way at first, at least the groundwork was laid for the next time. Oftentimes, the wackier idea, the better. Whatever stirs up controversy, headlines, and donations. Imperialists, meanwhile, are getting away with theft, hacking, graft, extortion, racketeering, and murder. Or, like Jello Biafra sings, greed, corruption, bigotry, and war. Greed, corruption. I could go into details here, and I will add examples throughout the book. But for now, I'm drawing on my favorite podcasters, which include Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, Chris Hedges, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore, Lee Camp, Sabrina Salvati, and the rest of the guys at Revolutionary Blackout Network. I highly recommend them to anyone who wants to get evidence based counter narratives to our government media complex's propaganda. Those who only watch CNN or Fox are only getting one side of every story. The Korean and Vietnam Wars, Reagan's war on drugs and on black and brown people, for example, more jail time for crack thugs than coke dealers. Clinton's closing of factories and exporting jobs set the stage for the events that followed 9/11. The war on rights, as seen in the Patriot Act. Former Secretary of Defense Clark Clifford remembers being told 10 days after 9/11 that we're going to war against Iraq. He asked the Pentagon official who told him this, why? And he was told, I don't know. Since 2001, our wars and military operations have killed 6 million people, most of them civilians in Central and Western Asia. The U.S. has created 37 million refugees, mostly in the Middle East. Between 2016 2019, over 33,000 civilians died in Syrian fighting, and almost 4,000 were killed in the bombing campaigns, half of them children. The 2 decades-long war in Afghanistan killed almost 50,000 civilians and 70,000 Afghan soldiers and police officers unrelated to 9/11. After the ignoble withdrawal, the U.S. froze, that is, stole $10 billion in assets from the Afghan central bank, which brings more misery to women and children than any oppression by the Taliban. Even sanctions are a form of murder when you consider Syria being unable to get earthquake relief or Venezuelans unable to get life saving medicines. Sanctions also lead to runaway inflation, and that means it becomes harder to eat or just pay the bills or to remain alive or housed. Other events seem to have been manufactured or manipulated to fit into the culture wars. For example, media outlets said Kyle Rittenhouse took his assault rifle to the BLM demonstration to shoot protesters, but video evidence shows police cars pushing the crowd towards Kyle and his armed friend who were guarding a used car lot. Matt Orfalia put together the video montage from about a dozen witnesses. Then a guy recently from this is part of the video montage from Matt. A guy recently released from a mental hospital tried to grab Kyle's rifle, chased him, tried again to grab his rifle, and was shot dead by Kyle, who had repeatedly raised his gun and yelled, "Friendly, friendly," before finally killing him. Then the crowd started chasing Kyle, yelling that he shot someone, cranium that guy. Someone hit his head with a rock and made him fall. Another guy tried to grab his gun and was shot and killed. Most people assume that the ones he shot, or the ones he shot at the BLM protest were blacks, but they weren't. Most assumed he was guilty of killing people, but he was found to be innocent because the video footage proved he killed in self-defense. Another event that almost seemed to be choreographed, the Pelosi home invasion. The initial release contained errors that were exposed by the 911 call, that there was a third person who called 911 and answered the door. The video was almost laughable, except to the major media outlets. It looked to me like Paul Pelosi and the gentleman intruder. He allowed Paul to call 911 and stood by as he talked to the 911 operator for a few minutes, saying his name was David. Let's see, and the gentleman intruder agreed. He and Pelosi seemed to agree to each have a hand on the hammer as they calmly opened the door and seemed to pose for the cops. David was barefoot and wearing a robe. They stepped a few steps back. Clearly, each had a hand on the hammer, and they struck a pose facing the cops carefully, not struggling, holding the hammer exactly between them. You could almost hear the director yell, "Take one, the home invasion. Ready, action." And David raises the hammer as he pushed Paul off camera. He strikes down in Pelosi's direction, but it's unclear if he hit Paul. Did he just fall back and pretend he was unconscious and unresponsive? We may never know. We do know that David was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In March of 2024, the PBS show Frontline reporter Eric Abernanti said that the January 6th committee admitted that the events that day were staged. In their own words, a publicity stunt, a fabricated TV production meant to manipulate the audience. James Goldston was the unannounced advisor for the committee, and he envisioned the hearing to be aired as a mini series over 6 episodes. He crafted the hearings to be more interesting to Americans who were not necessarily following the details into the probe of January 6th attack. Goldston is a 56-year-old British American journalist and media executive who came to the US in 2004 and worked as a reporter, landing a spot on Good Morning America in 2011. 3 years later, he became president of ABC News, owned by Disney. That was a quick rise. What? Point is, we're being propagandized in a big way every day by manufactured content. Get it? Manufactured content. It's just made up stories, pure theater. Then the focus always shifts to the next big concern. And no matter what the story is, the corporate media always spins everything, every story, every narrative into a left right dichotomy and never admits when they get a story wrong, like Russiagate or the Hunter laptop, COVID, or anything else. Right up, chapter 3, excuse me. The media, money, and the cool kids table. How many of you wanted to sit at the cool kids table at lunchtime in the middle school cafeteria or grade school or high school, whatever? Right up until the war on Gaza began, the major media outlets led every newscast with a Ukrainian update. NATO edges closer to direct combat with Russia, and the war chants increased against Iran, China, and Yemen. The NATO left continued to give the Democrats a pass when it comes to worldwide militarism, creeping martial law, and the decline of civil liberties. The crackdown on Cop City protesters in Georgia is a test case that the ruling class is determined to win. The filing of RICO charges against protesters is ludicrous, considering the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Individuals Act was originally enacted to counter the mafia's criminality. England's suspension of habeas corpus, established by the Magna Carta 1215 or so, allows for the no warrant detention of journalists and other dissenters and or protesters. In 2011, Obama designed the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 21, which did the same thing in this country. The Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Act, which authorizes government spying on U.S. citizens without having to obtain a warrant first, gets reauthorized every year because of New York Times headlines like "Government surveillance keeps us safe." This article from April 21st, 2024, edition, argued that our government already has the power to collect and store personal information due to the Patriot Act, so it can't be a Fourth Amendment violation against unreasonable search and seizures for them to peek at the data from time to time. Zelensky welcomes BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, and other exploitative businesses to his already corrupt country. Then in July 23, BlackRock announced a fire sale of Ukraine's assets as Zelensky makes good on his promise to privatize goods and services. Incidentally, Penny Pritzker has been picked to oversee the rebuilding of Ukraine. She of the Hyatt industry fortune. Her father, J.B. Pritzker, has been governor of Illinois since 2019, started several hedge funds and venture capitalist companies, and his family is in the top 10 richest American families. Many of the Fortune 500 companies are private equity firms whose sole purpose are to take over other firms, then strip out their assets, eliminate jobs. Carl Icahn started this model in the 1980s when he became known as a corporate raider who engineered the hostile takeover of TWA. Equity and wealth managers have taken over nearly all essential businesses: hospitals, real estate, agriculture, utilities, extractive industries, as well as having major investments in the arm industry, pharmaceuticals, insurance, carbon, banking, and technology. Pretty much covers it. Another corrupting influence: millions of dollars in donations to groups calling for social change. The Democratic National Committee provided all the funding for the Sunrise Movement when it launched in 2017, advocating for political action on climate change. BlackRock's Larry Fink has been funding BLM and LGBTQIA plus groups for a long time. The BLM movement was racked by scandal and infighting. The million women marched, but they made zero demands, and they protested just Trump. Trans rights activists are backed by industries like Raytheon and Boeing, who have their floats in pride parades. More than just free money, Larry, Zuck, Gates, Bezos, Buffett, and Soros respond to the DEI committee's demands for more diversity in the workplace, especially middle management with higher salaries and chances to affect their company's ESG ratings. Fink admits that the change is slow, and he muses about ways to force changes on other firms. He says there must be a way, more radical things that we can do to change and diverse. There must be more radical things we can do to enhance change and diversity. It must be imbued within the culture of the firm. BlackRock and Vanguard are the world's largest asset management companies with many trillions in assets. Officially, they're money lenders and asset managers. They have very large stakes in every large company, that's 500 of them, on Wall Street, especially media outlets. They're also known as shadow banks because of their enormous wealth and power. What's at stake? ESG ratings, as determined by the DEI committees, affect credit scores. Clients' lines of credit become their woke FICA, that is, their official ESG scores. Bud Light got its ESG rating lowered after Budweiser stock price tumbled and they pulled the ads that had promoted transsexuals. Business demand Businesses demand everyone reflect company values on the job and away from work. Workers can be fired for saying the wrong things about company policies. Larry Fink invented this system in 2016, tying DEI into legally mandated affirmative action. It seems like diversity is being used to divide and conquer everyone not on board with the virtue signalers. Today's activists must identify with a group. Their individual actions don't matter so much as if they just pledge allegiance to their tribe. Corporate media prop up the DEI committees and the ESG scores, and they dismiss critics like Chris Hedges as nihilists. However, like Fink and other modern CEOs say, change is slow and it's geared to stay that way. All woke companies and environmental groups engage in creeping incrementalism, baby steps, so critics have no choice other than to see this as stalling and milking and bilking the system. DEI, ESG factions demand that all voices be heard before anything gets done. And this guarantees that hardly anything ever will get accomplished. Michael Moore's movie, Planet of the Humans, cites 350.org and the Sierra Club as two groups that accept big monies from the very organizations that they're supposed to be working against. Hey, but we've exceeded those 350 parts per billion of carbon in the atmosphere. But changing the name might mean admitting defeat and, and stop the donations. The SCOTUS bumped up the culture war by axing affirmative action, but the lawyer reporter Glenn Greenwald dissects the decision to suggest affirmative action should have never been mandated in the first place. This is just based on MLK Jr.'s statement about a person's character being more important than the color of his or her skin. It led to many minorities getting admitted to the Ivy League schools and immediately flunking out because they didn't have the necessary background support. The last three Democratic presidents have had chances to codify Roe v. Wade, but they didn't because they need every wedge issue they can exploit. It's all just political theater designed by the establishment to distract the masses from the ever expanding militarism and theft of resources that they've been getting away with for centuries. Militarism has been growing exponentially for about 80 years. The US spends over $1 trillion on defense every year, more than the next 10 countries combined. New York City spends as much on their police force as North Korea spends on its whole entire military. It costs the US $1 trillion a year just to service our $33 trillion debt. Various credit rating agencies have begun to downgrade the U.S. Treasury bills from AAA plus. Other countries do much more for their citizens than our government does for us. Our tax dollars pay for the Ukrainian salaries and pensions of all government workers, including free health care. Israel receives free health care and free education paid by us. We pay for Israel's health care system, including allowing Israelis to come to the US for immediate free organ transplants. No waiting. Many unrelated topics are included in the annual defense budget, like the censorship of critics, transgender rights, and other emotional push button issues. The military industrial complex employs 1 million people, and the 800 plus military bases around the world keep another million or so soldiers busy. A large reduction in our military budget would cause a recession and or depression or simply a crash. The militarism is rampant abroad and at home. Vicious cop murders continue, so commonplace that new headlines need to be dreamed up, like brutality, then nonchalance. Now, here's a topical article. Mentioned the Tyree Nichols incident in Memphis. Just those 3 black officers just found guilty uh, this week. But as in the past, what happens is they get sentenced to like 25 years hard labor, and then after about 2 or 3 years, quietly released. So I wouldn't doubt that happens here. But here it goes. Um, anyway, we had headlines from Memphis back in the when Tyree Nichols was first brutally beaten. Brutality, then nonchalance, in reference to the death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis. The article goes on. A muddled picture emerges from the police video. It shows the murder, then the casual, easygoing behaviors of the cops, smiling, laughing, high fiving. The EMTs didn't help him. They walked away from his writhing body. There are double standard operating procedures now. Many police are veterans and they act like they are invincible because they do operate with impunity. They do whatever they want because so many of them are immune from prosecution. Police unions are very strong. Their sole purpose is the protection of its members. If there's an uproar, maybe someone's fired, then rehired somewhere else nearby, or a cash settlement goes to the victim's family. End of story. Our media rightly made a big deal out of the brutal murder of Adnan Khashoggi, as well they should have. However, the vicious beating, torture, and murder of Nichols that had him crying out for his mother goes beyond the treatment Khashoggi reportedly received. The cops have been acting this way since the slow strangulation of George Floyd when his executioner stared impassively at the camera for 10 minutes, knowing the police union would do everything possible to have him exonerated. So, why aren't there more protests, strikes, work stoppages? Are people afraid to push back against tyranny? Is it the fear of failure? Or have they been pushed into easy to understand left versus right ideologies and comforting lies and promises? Every day, every news story has its own spin, and most people want to be associated with the winning team. Everyone wants to be the hero. No one wants to be the goat. Interesting enough, the word tragedy comes from the phrase goat song. Tragedy, goat song? What do you mean? It's a reference to the practice of giving a live goat to the best Athenian actors to be sacrificed to Dionysus after the goat song is sung. Ever since winners and trophies and the goat, wait, ever since Winners get trophies, and the goat is the person who made the mistake causing the tragedy. The goat song. French leader Macron tried to raise the retirement age by 2 years, and 2 million people declared a general strike, nearly shut the system down. This is in a European Union country where, during the pandemic, the workers were furloughed but not laid off as they were in this country. Our economy was nearly wiped out with millions of small businesses going under, massive upheavals at all levels of society. Surprisingly, no one objected, at least not strongly enough to draw attention to the plight of the small business owners, parents, nurses, truckers, students, and other essential workers. I noticed similar apathy regarding our country's continuous conflicts in the name of American exceptionalism, that is, hegemony and global domination. The Monroe Doctrine. Many EU countries have leftist political parties and massive protests, whereas in the US, if a small group of protesters blocks traffic, the media report it like it's domestic terrorism, and people gripe about not getting to their lattes on time. The establishment has figured out how to redirect feelings of anger, embarrassment, and rage. Let the masses fight it out amongst themselves. We're encouraged to hate our neighbors and treat the others like idiots, too ignorant to be taken seriously. We're goaded into thinking they're too stupid to be able to even talk to them, so deny them free speech. Um, to talk to them, to read about them. No one should do their own research to do anything. If anyone pays attention, things like the greatest upward transfer of wealth in history, $5 trillion via the CARES Act, come into light. The Trump tax cuts removed $1 trillion in annual discretionary funds from our Treasury. Biden didn't repeal those cuts. He didn't end Trump's kids in cages policies. The Democrats didn't codify Roe v. Wade when they had several chances. Better to focus on emotional, cultural, and oppressed minority issues than economic exploitation and the denial of basic rights. Feelings, not facts, become the most important issues. Emotions over rational brain power. The pandemic caused $15 trillion to our economy as thousands of workers were laid off and a million small businesses went bankrupt. Since then, the U.S. war on terrorism has cost $8 trillion. Iraq alone cost $5 trillion and millions of lives. Like Scoop Jackson kind of said, a trillion here, a trillion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. The Pentagon admits to $2 trillion gone missing between 1995 and 2015. Countries no longer need to buy oil from Saudi Arabia using dollars, so the dollar will soon no longer be the world's reserve currency. The campaign promises about student debt relief are forgotten. The bank and BlackRock moratoriums on home foreclosures are expiring. Emergency SNAP benefits are ending. Inflation and layoffs are rising. And the US plan to hurt Russia economically is backfiring. In a way, it's fun to watch what Peter Tosh's song sang about the day the dollar die. It's kind of interesting to watch it come about, but it's disconcerting to see average Americans suffer economic hardships. And if the downward spiral continues, disaster looms. Full Crazy Town finds a home in Blue Jean, Oregon. This place is known widely as the lefty lib capital of the US, California notwithstanding. This is woo woo land, replete with aging pseudo hippie boomers like me. But unlike me, the identity politics groups go full tilt, my way or no way. by demanding special rights and viciously attacking anyone who doesn't accept them immediately. Maybe they think it's payback time against straight white males. So now it's time to oppress the oppressors, hate the haters. I sent a letter to the local alternative paper, Eugene Weekly, titled Don't Hate Haters, in response to a trans rights activist that someone she scolded and name called needed to face and embrace her movement. The Weekly passed my letter on to her along with my email address. And so I got a picture of someone painted up like the Hindu goddess Kali, the goddess of ultimate power, time, destruction, and change. Picture of Kali sticking her tongue out at me. Then she wrote a long response in the paper stating that I need to listen to her. She mentioned the word listen about 5 or more times. Listen to me, face and embrace me. I sent a letter to the Weekly in response to a complaint about the lack of volunteers at a local warming center. I explained how I was trying to help our clients, but another volunteer, I'll call her Karen because that's her name, seemed to have her own agenda. She yelled at me, took issue with my every utterance, and generally gave me a consistent hard time, eventually driving me off. All I was trying to do was to get her to defocus from chatting and laughing with her friends and to pay more attention to our guests in the warming center. Volunteers are some of the biggest virtue signalers. They walk around with big smiles, always making sure that the other volunteers are okay and happy. However, our desperate, unhoused guests often aren't happy. And I always tried to keep them from getting more upset than they already were. I know that desperate people do desperate things. And sure enough, right after I quit, in a Roseburg center, 3 people were stabbed by a guest who was then shot dead by police. Blue Jean is all about various sects vying for attention, control, and if necessary, revenge. Her. I think they've been tricked into confusing oppression with exploitation. See the difference? Oppression is like when a woman is denied entry into an all men's club. It's not fair, but it's not an extreme hardship. I think that most special interest groups should be more worried about themselves than smearing critics and trying to present themselves as the most oppressed minority. They strive to climb to the top of the pyramid of power, explained later. They see the media and men as the ones holding them down, which is true enough, but they make the common mistake of attacking the persons, not the problem. The ones who try to attack the problems are up against the politicians, unelected spooks in the national security state, defense contractors, big pharma, big insurance, big carbon, big banks, Silicon Valley billionaires, celebrities, media figures, and many others who want to be the master of all they survey. Think about it. Doesn't everyone want to be too big to fail? If given the chance, wouldn't almost everyone be interested in overseeing the world, even if only for a day? Here are some lyrics from the group Bad Religion, their song, I Want to Conquer the World. Give all the idiots a brand new religion, put an end to poverty, uncleanliness, and toil, promote equality in all my decisions, with a quick wink of the eye. When the establishment gets challenged, they know the best defense against pushback is a rip roaring, no holds barred offense. This offense takes many forms. Perhaps the most insidious strategy is the we really care about you so much that we'll censor and deplatform anyone who criticizes you. The big club, George Carlin's definition, wants to come off as encouraging everyone to be like them, upwardly mobile, concerned about people and the climate, happy energetic, embracing life. However, the exact opposite is the case. They're just giving lip service to the oppressed minorities who are desperate for acceptance and eager to gain their own influence. But it's a members only deal with strict rules and codes of conduct. The wannabe elites are sucking up to the power centers in a desperate attempt to curry favors, pledge allegiance, and be a winner. I watched the Oscars a while back, and nearly every recipient said, "Thank you for giving me a seat at the table." I mean, everyone. "Thank you for giving me a seat at the table." That would be the cool kids' table in the middle school cafeteria at lunchtime. Okay, about 10 more minutes or so. The billionaire class got their start in Silicon Valley, hyping phrases like move fast and break things. They exemplified the California cool way of life. Nice, smart people with great ideas and plans for monopolizing the internet. Google, Facebook, and Amazon were started by predicting a new wave of free speech and endless networking possibilities. However, as we follow the money, we see that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Big tech took orders from the US intelligence security agencies and censored, deplatformed, demonetized numerous individuals, starting with Alex Jones on the right, then moving on to Omali Yashita on Florida's Uhuru movement on the left. Podcasts and independent media are all suppressed. Matt Taibbi describes this California nice as being cult like. And indeed, there are books about, was it weirdos of, weirdos. Oh my gosh, I wrote it down somewhere. Laurel Canyon, weirdos and weird scenes inside of Laurel Canyon. Anyway, leaders are phony and weird. He says Elon Musk may have multiple personalities. And this is Matt Taibbi talking about Elon Musk. He may have multiple personalities because when he was releasing the Twitter files to Matt, he would change his mind about big decisions about every 20 minutes or so. It was up to his associates to massage him into a corner, make him finally decide on something, and then race off before he could change his mind. The content moderators that take orders from their digital overlords are not as smart, according to Taibbi and others. However, they feel smart because they bought into the dominant narrative that results in huge salaries if they just do as they're told. They're like the professional managerial class, roughly 25% of the population that has college degrees. They love to brag about how clever they are and how deplorable the other 75% is. However, Matt recalls an email between such moderators where one of them after being after being told to debunk a scientific article, "Isn't there a website that does this kind of thing?" Not that smart. The censorship industrial complex is populated by clueless people who have nothing to say unless they're mouthing platitudes, arguing, shouting, interrupting, or just making stupid excuses for themselves and others. Matt wonders, who are these people? How did they come in? How did they come to be so entitled? Are parents still doing their laundry? They attach themselves to social values and appoint themselves enforcers. The hive mind tells them to focus on race and gender issues, and these discussions just go round and round in endless opining and hectoring. The news gets crazier all the time, and eventually people get confused and or insecure. They don't know what to think, or they just don't want to think about tough issues or answer complicated questions. If they have food on the table plus some savings, They don't want to or have to think about those who don't. Let's examine on a former leader of a branch of the ultra-rich hipsters, Jeffrey Epstein. He rose up the ranks of insiders, going from shady financial dealings to arms trafficking to international intrigue, finally specializing in trafficking young girls to politicians and celebrities. He probably welcomed guests to his private Virgin Island, Little St. James, with some kind of welcome to our tiny cabal of ruling elites speech. Then he'd compromise them into having sex with underage girls, take secret videos of the action, and use the tapes to blackmail them if necessary. The tapes were also used to pressure politicians into going easy on sex trafficking charges against Jeff. Ghislaine Maxwell, his one time girlfriend and cohort, told friends that Little St. Thomas was it was completely wired as an insurance policy. Mainly, it was a welcome to the cult ritual that meant the newbie had made it to a seat at the table, as long as he didn't try to double cross the cool kids or break any of their rules. Using sex with underage girls' tapes to blackmail politicians and celebrities is bad enough, but author Whitney Webb takes a deeper dive into what's at stake here: worldwide domination by a moneyed criminal gang. Her well researched footnote and indexed book, One Nation Under Blackmail, goes into the merger of our government and the mob. She goes into the World Economic Forum's plan to form a worldwide public private partnership and to prevent the great replacement, which is black and brown people replacing white ones. I think that was like one of their many conspiracy theories. She starts with Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's dad. His relationship with Israel and its secret service, Mossad, led to Israel getting atomic bomb technology after he sold them software from U.S. nuclear facilities. He was helped in this by Henry Kissinger. He had relationships with intelligence agencies in Israel, Russia, Bulgaria, Britain, and the US via the Iran Contra affair. Robert Maxwell was mainly known as a high flying press baron and former member of parliament. He was also a financier who once rescued Trump from one of his many bankruptcies. He died in 1991 when he fell, jumped, or was pushed off his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. His death touched off investigations into his pension fund, which led to fraud allegations against his estate and the biggest bankruptcy in Britain's history. £450 million Bank of Credit and Commerce Incorporated scandal. Maxwell was born in Czechoslovakia in what is now Ukraine. His contacts with communist leaders in 1948 were crucial to Czechoslovakia's decision to arm Israel in the Arab Israeli War. This is page 40. I've only got 6 minutes, and I am going to stop here because I notice every time I mention certain topics, in the first two episodes, I'd start to break up, bad audio, bad video, and it's jump ahead 5 or 10 seconds. So if that happens, I would encourage everybody to buy my book. It's only $14 on my website, fullcrazytown.com. But it's a way of sort of getting past the censors, and especially if my podcast is not back next week with episode 4, that means I've been deplatformed because I dared to tread on tender subjects. So, like I said, I'd advise if I get deplatformed, I'll work on another platform. I'm not really too sure how to do that. It took me about 6 months to get this one set up because I'm so challenged technologically. But I am learning. We're all learning, in fact, if we're paying attention, if we're doing our own research. So keep a sense of humor. Here we have it, the Firesign Theater album, All Hail, Lennon Marx. How can you be in two places at once when you're not anywhere at all? So it's good back then, it's good now. Do your own research. Don't sell out to a special interest group. Don't sacrifice your own morality, your ethics, your principles, and standards, and do the right thing. On your deathbed, you'll look back and you'll know you did the right thing, and you'll be glad of it. You won't have, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda. None of that. And I hope you have a good week. Hope everything works out as far as World War III and nuclear holocaust go. But you never know what might happen. Main thing is don't give up, don't surrender, Dorothy. Take it easy. See you later.